put in that statement because one of the questions we frequently got in the community is, why do we need to have a bylaw about this? Why don't we just, put it as part of the budget, which in municipalities is possible, but within the CVRD as a structure is not possible. What are the risks of doing nothing? At this time, seniors, families, workers need to leave the region to find appropriate housing. There are impacts to the business community in that it's difficult to find and keep workers. There are impacts to the economy because people are house poor and can't afford to enjoy themselves. And there are impacts to health. Housing is one of the social determinants of health. Healthy, safe housing helps people to stay healthy. Housing that's unsafe, whether due to mold, lack of insulation, or other factors, contributes to ill health. And not having a home at all, of course, creates all kinds of health risks. And then, of course, there are the policing costs. Where we currently stand in the region is that we have identified a backlog of 750 needed housing units. Of those, 385 are for households with an average income of $18,964 dollars per year. These households are considered to be in core housing need. We also need 365 for households with an average income of $44,448, who are the missing middle or the working people in our communities. We also know that there are an estimated 194 units requiring repair in the private market. We know that the existing social housing stock needs repairs and upgrades, and the projected investment is anticipated to be in the order of $1.5 million per year for the foreseeable future. And we know that there's anticipated demand for affordable housing from 2017 to 2026 of 864 units to meet the needs of people in the region for affordable housing. In terms of background information, how did we get to where we are today? We know that concerns about affordable housing have been increasing since the early 2000s. Social Planning Cowichan took the lead and published their first report called Inadequate Shelter in the Cowichan in 2007. Warmland House was opened in 2009 to address the challenge of homelessness in the region. There was an affordable housing strategy published in 2010. The CVRD completed a regional housing needs assessment in 2014. Social Planning Cowichan undertook an Aboriginal off-reserve housing needs study in the same year. And 2014 was also the first year of a winter point in time count for the number of absolutely homeless people in the region. Cowichan Housing Association was formed in 2015 because the issue of affordable housing was overwhelming the other issues that Social Planning Cowichan was trying to address. In 2015, the CVRD board commissioned the development of a business case for a Cowichan Valley Regional Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which you're all familiar with. The CVRD's Community Satisfaction Survey of 2016 identified that 90% of respondents support the development of strategies for affordable housing, with 62% strongly supporting the development of such strategies. Last year, the CVRD board began looking at a possible role in addressing the crisis of affordable housing, and in 2018 proposed the service. So what is the proposed service? Bylaw 4201 is a bylaw to establish a service to provide an annual financial contribution to Cowichan Housing Association. The service established by this bylaw would provide an annual financial contribution to assist the Cowichan Housing Association with costs associated with providing programs and services related to affordable housing and homelessness prevention in the Cowichan region. The CVRD board will sign an operating agreement with the CHA to deliver the affordable housing service in a cost-effective and accountable manner on behalf of the community. The service area is the boundaries of the whole of the Cowichan Valley Regional District. The public interest will be protected by the CVRD through the following measures: an operating agreement between the CVRD and the Cowichan Housing Association, requirements for annual work plans to be approved by the CVRD board, and requirements for annual reporting with full financial accounting for the funds that are allocated. The Cowichan Housing Association, as mentioned earlier, was incorporated in 2015 and established in response to an identified need for an organization to address the issues of affordable housing and homelessness in the Cowichan region. Its vision is that the safe, affordable, culturally appropriate housing is available for everyone in the Cowichan region. At this time, it works to prevent homelessness and increase affordable housing options in the Cowichan region through facilitating affordable housing development, supported by research, community development, and homelessness prevention programs. In 2018, they are developing an attainable housing strategy which will assess housing stock and need in communities around the region, identify options for innovative, adaptive, and sustainable housing tailored to the needs of the region, and provide direction for local governments, nonprofits, business, and community groups to take action to address the challenge of affordable housing. Their board and staff have extensive experience with many different aspects of affordable housing. The Cowichan Housing Association works in collaboration with many community-based organizations as well as developers and local governments. The CHA is best suited and well positioned to lead and deliver the affordable housing service in a cost-effective and accountable manner on behalf of the community. This is going on really long, and I'm just saying that I'm giving you the whole picture so that you can tell me if there's any gaps. Obviously, in any kind of community presentation, we would summarize or highlight points that we thought were most important. We want to make sure that we have everything together, though, in one place. So, in terms of the role of the CVRD, increasingly local governments are having to take a leadership role in addressing the housing affordability crisis. Leadership can and should be in the form of policy and land use decisions, but also in providing financial contributions towards housing initiatives. For example, recent announcements regarding the National Housing Strategy, which is anticipated to invest significant new money into communities to address affordable housing needs, have emphasized that all levels of government need to be involved with community-based organizations in working together on affordable housing issues. It's anticipated that funds will be required to leverage additional funds from senior levels of government. The proposal for the Affordable Housing Service, as presented by the Cowichan Housing Association, reflects the considerable work being undertaken within the Cowichan community, including community-based organizations, churches, and local governments, to develop a comprehensive and effective response to the issue of affordable housing and homelessness within the Cowichan region. The community is mobilizing to develop capacity and partnerships to meet current needs for shelter and affordable housing and prevent homelessness. The community planning process identified that there is a gap in financial resources at the local level to provide opportunities for matching or leveraging funds for projects to be financed by the National Housing Strategy. In addition, in response, the CVRD board has proposed the establishment of a regional affordable housing contribution service to be managed via contribution agreement by the Cowichan Housing Association. In making this decision, the board considered the relative merits of having the CVRD operate such a service in contrast with contracting with the CHA as a community-based organization to operate such a service. It was decided that, with appropriate accountability measures, it was more effective to have the CHA work closely with the community in developing affordable housing, both because the CHA is more closely in touch with community-based organizations and because it is more cost-effective. The cost of providing this service is raised through property value taxes based on the net taxable value of land and improvements. The maximum amount of money that may be requisitioned annually in support of this service is $765,000. The cost of this service for residential taxpayers is anticipated to be $3.87 per $100,000 of assessed value of the home. For a $500,000 home, the cost per year would be $19.35. Affordable housing is a key part of our region's future. The proposed financial contribution service will provide seed funding for leveraging additional funds from senior levels of government so that more affordable housing can be built in our region. Without this local investment, the Cowichan region may miss opportunities for investment by other levels of government and other partners in affordable housing. Safe, affordable housing matters to everyone, including our most vulnerable populations, seniors, families with young children, and people with disabilities, and by everyday people who want to put down roots in our region, young professionals, teachers, small businesses, nurses, retail and restaurant employees, and so many others. For more information, you can go to these particular sites, and that ends my presentation.
A suggestion, but first I want to say, wow, that was really comprehensive. I appreciate it. And I know all the work that you and your department have done on this, and I appreciate it. And what came up for me a couple of times when you mentioned it's not just homeowners, but renters can, I wondered if there's a way to phrase it that all Canadian citizens 18 and over, I guess they have to have the ID, are eligible to vote, because I'm thinking of the young people who are precariously housed or still living at home at 25. They might not think they're allowed to vote if we say homeowners and renters can vote. So I'm just wondering if there's a way to phrase that, because you can actually be homeless and vote if you have the ID, right? So.
Thank you very much for that clarification. We'll make sure and put it in.
Thank you.
Joe, would you like to add something here?
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's problematic. There's a number of qualifications. You have to qualify as an elector. And if we wanted to quote exactly what the rules are, we'll start doing what we did 2 weeks ago with the wordsmithing, et cetera. We need to have the basic that people can vote. And I'll discuss this with Chris for the promotional campaign stuff. But at the end of the day, if you qualify as an elector, you are able to vote in the referendum.
Thank you. And we're moving on now to, oh, sorry.
I really appreciate what Mr. Barry's saying and the complication of it. And I really think that this issue that hits a lot of young people, whether they're housed in their families' homes, most of them in their 20s don't want to be there. And so I'm sure, I'm very confident that wording can come out that's not too complicated. Because I'm really aware if we give even anyone the idea that it's onerous to be qualified, they might start voting as young as, not start voting as young as they could. And I'm speaking from experience. I've always voted federally and provincially, but even though I owned a home in my 20s, I didn't always vote in my 20s in municipal elections. So I think that there's a gap there to get younger people to realize that this does impact them in a really positive way, or not, if they get involved locally.
Yep, and Director Stone has a question as well. Go ahead.
So I think it's important to realize also that the CVRD information campaign out there is only one of the multiple information campaigns that are going to be out there. So we're really focusing on factual and getting the information out. The One Cowichan organization is planning to do a comprehensive campaign. Cowichan Housing Association also is, and so I'm thinking that through the Cowichan Housing Association or some other community-based group, there may be an opportunity to do a targeted campaign for young people in particular. Another point was made about on and off reserve, that this is a matter that affects on and off reserve, that all residents of the CVRD and in this case, residents on reserve are also eligible to vote. So somehow those messages will have to get out, but it might be in a more targeted manner than our comprehensive approach.
Mr. Barry.
Madam Chair, we're actually forgetting something that's really important here. This is not a standalone referendum. there will be people, candidates running for area director, counselors, school trustee. They will all be encouraging people to vote for them. The referendum is part of the election. So the more people that come out to vote for the candidates, that's who will be voting for the referendum. So it's not a standalone. So we have to work to get people out to vote. And it's actually, the question will be on the ballot that people receive for area director, counselor, school trustee. So that's an important point we haven't looked at
Thank you, Director
in this
McGuire.
discussion.
Oh, sorry.
I just wanted to say it's the first time I've seen the presentation, and it was comprehensive enough for me to understand the who, what, where, when, and why on this. The only question that I asked about halfway through, I think it was after you listed what the bylaw, you sort of read out what the bylaw might include, and I wondered if there was a dollar amount attached to it. Later, you do break it down per household, and I don't know if there's any value in including it, but it was just something that I think it might come up as you go around on your town halls. Thanks.
Director Stone.
Yeah, and I'll be really brief, but we're going through a case study that really supports the referendum and the service right now in Ladysmith. And just for reference, the Resources Center in Ladysmith received a generous donation from an estate when someone passed away, and they turned that $300,000 into a property purchase that's allowing them to build affordable housing. It's $3.6 million coming from BC Housing, and then an additional top-up from CMHC to make the project a reality. So I've had a lot of questions saying, well, how much does $500,000 do? Well, $300,000 is going to build 36 supportive units in our community, or has the ability to do that. So I think it's important to note that it's not a little amount of money when you look at what's available out there from federal and provincial forces in terms of helping, less than $10,000 of community money per unit is generating over $100,000 in federal and provincial money per unit. So I think it's really important that if you think, $500,000 a year, how far does that go? You could probably estimate you could build at least 50 units a year, and if you're really collaborative and have land already, you could probably turn it into many more. So I just think it's an important point.
Director Acton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Director Stone, those are some excellent points, and I think it's also important that we are knowledgeable about what's going on in some of the municipalities, but also in electoral areas where we are not just trying to conquer this crisis with just one approach by asking them for a service, where we are also looking at ways that we can approach it with land use planning or incentives and that type of thing. And so I just wanted to point out that we will be discussing it at our next electoral area services. And
Thank you.
it's important as well.
Okay, now I can call on Kate Miller to come to the podium. Welcome, Kate.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'm just going to load the presentation. It was a very busy morning this morning, so. And apologies for my voice. I probably, like everybody else, it's been affected to some degree by the.
In the meantime,
The
Chris
snow.
would like to speak while you're getting ready. Go ahead, Chris.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It was probably worth noting with a little bit of discussion about getting people out to vote is I met with my colleagues from the municipalities just yesterday to talk about a voter promotion strategy to, aside from the referendum, but just more general to get people out voting within our district. So there is a plan and some dollars being contemplated to do just that. And I think, in the meantime, if you have people concerned about, I guess I should digress, within our materials that we've been developing so far, we've used the term, as Joe was saying, it's very complicated, but just to say all eligible voters. And for voter eligibility is all available on our website through the Ledge Services area. So we'll certainly be considering how we can give some profile to that through our regional approach to it.
Thank you. Kate, you ready?
Yes, thank you.
Good, thank you.
I just wanted to go back and comment on something that Chris had said earlier, but maybe didn't state it in its full form, is when we started to work on this particular referendum, we'd originally thought that there would just be one referendum. And then knowing that there's two referendum, we wanted to make sure that as we communicate to the public that there is not some confusion by the members of the public about the two different referendums. And so as much as possible, we've tried to parallel the information. The presentation material, both will be presented side by side, so there is no onus on one over the other. So that's just something to keep in mind. You'll also notice my presentation is a little briefer. And, well, this is not a bad thing, but a lot of the information that Bev provided to you can be pulled over in terms of the rationale and the comments with regards to how it would be funded. So without more ado, I will start on the draft, and certainly input at always appreciated, and how we fine-tune it prior to providing it to you by Friday. So we know that water is fundamentally linked to the quality of life in our region, not only our human health, but the environment we live in, our climate, our safety, our food, our livelihood, and the growth of our communities. Our primary job as local government is to manage the orderly development of our communities, and we cannot do this without understanding and stewarding the fundamental resources underlying them. We have to consider how land use both impacts the hydrological cycle and how we can mitigate its effects, low impact development, changes to growth, etc. We also have to consider what infrastructure and plans we need to put in place to get ahead of the evolving problem. Bulk water supply planning, for example, protective flood measures, and others. So the CVRD encounters challenges with both water quality and water quantity across the region. We have 17 watersheds. They're all distinct. While we mention costs, and costs are always something that's concerned to our community, we have to have the broader view, the long view. And so when we mention cost, we need to consider both immediate cost as well as the long-term costs and how they relate to housing, jobs, agriculture, and community health in the long term. So thinking about these issues, not just immediately, but how do we get ahead of these issues and problems that we see forecasted into the future. Risks, again. We started to experience areas across the region where both surface and groundwater resources are affected, and at the same time, our hazards are growing by external pressures on the region, both population and climatic. Climate will also continue to affect both water quality in both hot summer as well as high rain conditions. We need to consider the impacts on our ecological and cultural resources with direct loss of fisheries, food fisheries, notably shellfish, and indirectly the social impacts should water quality such as that affecting Quamachin Lake and other areas continue. We're in a level 4 drought situation at this time across this region. Originally, it was just the Cook Isla system, and now it's increased. Our fire risk is increased enormously as well. And this means ecological and social consequences, as well as economic and individual at the individual and community level. We know that groundwater and surface water conditions are linked, and we can also see substantial water stress in parts of our region. We've seen a trend in our climate projections indicate more intense winter rain than we've seen in the past, and longer and drier and hotter summers. We need to consider these impacts in our planning. We need to understand and work within our system conditions, as well as considering adaptive responses to support functional communities that we have and we hope to have. Excuse me. The proposed drinking water and watershed protection service, a little bit of background. In 2008, the CVRD developed the region's first environmental strategy, including a focus on watershed management, climate, and partnerships. Watershed is a priority across the region, and we need to consider institutionalizing it in our organization and in our decisions. Over the last 10 years, the issues have grown, and information from additional studies and information has been brought forward, indicating that a shotgun approach is no longer neither sustainable nor strategic. We have to consider embedding it into our planning. Let me start that word again. From the Community Satisfaction Survey in 2016 and again in 2017, public processes were, through those processes, the public was asked for its input on the role of local government in addressing water and watershed protection in the region. And the CVRD heard loud and clear that water was a top priority. The CVR also heard that addressing challenges requires a regional approach to protecting water quality and water quantity as our communities grow. In March of 2018, this spring, with the direction of the board, the CVRD announced the potential Drinking Water and Watershed Protection Service, which will be voted on publicly this fall. The proposed service recognizes the importance of integrated water and watershed planning in the organization, as well as the protection to build long-term community resilience in the face of climate change. We have tools at our disposal now. We just don't have the internal capacity to use them effectively. This program will provide those resources and capacity. We also know that water is a cross-cutting issue. This program has been designed to accommodate that and includes environmental, engineering, and land use considerations. We also know we cannot do this alone and will be working in partnership with many others, including the province, the federal government, as well as more closely with our communities here in the region. This is a regional, structured, and forward-facing approach to addressing drinking water and watershed management. We see the anticipated benefits of the Drinking Water and Watershed Protection Service to include leadership, data sharing, local control, increased opportunities for federal and provincial leveraging, and community-made solutions to address global and local issues. The key benefit is a coordinated approach to addressing issues for cross-boundary projects, less duplication of effort, as well as a more coordinated partnership with non-government organizations. At present, water within our region is provided by a variety of utilities. Homeowners with a well, or more than the 44 separate utilities across our region, both CVRD, public, and private. While these organizations will continue their infrastructure responsibilities, a regional role would allow cross-boundary issues to be addressed with less duplication of effort, more consistency, and strategically. The same principle applies to coordination with non-government organizations. A small regional role could facilitate sharing information and training, empowering NGOs to increase their collective effectiveness. What about costs? It's the first question people ask. The work plan and the budgets are reviewed and approved annually by the board. When it comes to planning, the focus is often on community services or transportation, energy, recreation, or other services, yet water and housing are also keys to our future. The cost to the homeowners is based on the residential tax of $3.79 per $100,000 value. The bylaw has a number per 100,000, which is a multiplier of the overall property and improvement value of everything in the region, and results in a value of $750,000 total raised under this program in full build-out. The region has many classes of property: forestry, commercial, industrial, residential, bare land, etc. If the value of the region goes up, the potential amount raised could increase in the future, but the load would be borne by a larger group. Staff have identified a work plan and key priorities to inform the first phase of this program and a draft budget. One of the largest issues would be future costs for taxpayers as we react to water shortages, flooding, wildfires, erosion, pollution, and sea level rise, already all beginning to happen or expressed in the region. With proper watershed planning, we can minimize those costs to taxpayers and ensure that new development builds in the infrastructure necessary to provide water supply, water conservation, and protection from future impacts such as flooding or fire. We need to understand to manage our groundwater resources to avoid dropping well levels and impacts to the agricultural sector with irrigation restrictions, etc., such as which will impact our food production, ventures, related economic industries. We share our surface and groundwater resources with the rest of the ecosystem and need to manage watersheds and aquifers to minimize environmental impacts to fish, wildlife, and wetlands, as well as recreational opportunities in the tourism industry. All of these impacts would greatly impact what we value most in the region, our high quality of life. The CVRD is committed to providing a clean, safe, and reliable drinking water supply for the region. And how can we as a region prepare for the future without bringing these considerations in-house? So for more information, you can go to the CVRD website. I'm not sure if that is going to be the main landing place. We'll wait for Chris's direction on that, or whether there'll be a subdirectory /water/housing or something along those lines. I've also included, because there may be some questions about more explicit pieces rather than having them in the slide deck. There'll be a break. What does the bylaw actually say? So the specific legal language in the bylaw that we're proposing, so that's part of your package, as well as a slightly more broken down component of the draft budget at this point in time. And so that's all I have at this point.
Thank you so much. Question is Director.
Hello, thank you so much, Madam Chair. Ms. Miller, I thought I saw on one of your slides it was $379 per 100K, and now this is $353. I could have mistyped it, but.
Oh. Apologies, you should go with we've got two different consulting companies working with us at this point, which is why the last minute amalgamation of the two PowerPoints.
Okay.
Chris, can you give me the number that we are using on the householder?
My understanding it's 379.
379, yes.
So this is just a typo.
It's a slide from the
Okay.
other consultant, yes.
Thank you.
Director Lefebvre. Thank you. Okay, and Director McGuire.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. Again, this is the first time I've seen it, so I get to come with some fresh eyes. I think for me what was missing in this was the reading out of what's included in the bylaw. We just glimpsed it there. I don't know if you can go back to that slide, but housing is an easier thing for people to conceptualize. If I give X amount of money, somebody's going to get a unit kind of exchange. For this one, it's harder. You know, how is CVRD going to actually make a difference to our water supply when we're in a level 4 drought in this part of the province? So this piece here might help explain, you know, obtaining and holding water licenses. Okay, that's something concrete that people can attach this to.
Yep.
Otherwise, I look forward to hearing how this goes with the public before the election. Thanks.
Okay. Director Nicholson and Director Stone.
Could you go to the last slide, please? That one. So I have some concern about the draft budget. And I think the last bullet, grants and financial support to others, $60,000. And I think that, first of all, the leadership on water issues in the community have been our stewardship groups, by and large. And I think that if we're going to deliver on protecting our water, we need to work very closely with them. And we had a meeting to talk to them about how we can better do that. And one of the things I would say is that we need to consult with them on how we're going to be delivering this service, because that is a very long list on the other slide of things that we intend to do. And we have very limited money in which to do those things. And I think, case in point, grant some financial support to others, $60,000, isn't going to provide support to them. And we need them to support this service when they're out in the community talking to people. And so when you tell them that, I mean, currently Environmental Services provides $50,000 to the Cowichan Watershed Board. This is $10,000 more than what we're doing now. That's not going to help the people in Ladysmith. That's not going to help the Shawnigan Basin Society. It's not going to help the people out at the lake deliver their programming in any substantially greater way. So I think that this needs more discussion, and putting this out there right now is just like a red flag for the people who are our biggest supporters on the water thing. So I don't think this would be a good thing to do.
I have Director Stone and then Director Kuhn.
Actually, I had much the same question on that one item there, was that I wasn't sure what the number off the top of my head was for Cowichan Watershed Board, but I know that the stewardship groups would, could use some support as well, that, to model after the Cowichan Watershed Board, but I'm not sure if 50,000 of that 60,000 would be sort of directed there, if 10,000 is enough to sprinkle around to the other groups. They may not be as sophisticated yet, or maybe they can collaborate together, but something to think about. But I think the same, on top of this information that gets put out there, case studies or a reflection on some of the challenges we're going through around water and watershed issues is quantified for people. In Ladysmith, we will spend just under $30 million over a 4-year period on improving our filtration system due to climate change and land use impacts, and increasing our storage due to the lack of snowfall. And the rhetoric that goes out there is often, oh, well, if you cut back on the growth, but in real terms, an actual quantity of water used, the amount of water we use today in Ladysmith, even with the growth over the last 15 years, is actually less on total volume than it was 15 years ago because of our initiatives around conserving water. So we're actually using less water now in a much larger community than we were 15 years ago, and yet we're concerned about being able to provide water in the future. Just first summer after this term started, we went through that drought. A lot of us were pretty worried about it. And then the costs, $30 million for a community of 9,000 people, a lot of federal grant funding and provincial grant funding, thank you for that. But when you look at it in context, had we had the information that a service like this will provide 15 years ago, we may have mitigated a lot of the impacts. We didn't have, we weren't exceeding turbidity under the guidelines, the 4321 guidelines 15 years ago. Now we are regularly, especially in the winter, because of forestry impacts and then the heavier rains in the winter. We had a culvert bridge washout that's going to be just this last fall from the torrential rains, and then the lack of the upstream systems to be able to hold and absorb that water. So I think that we could all in our own communities probably find an example where the amount of money that we would spend on a service like this looking forward would, it's, penny wise, pound foolish. So I just think that we could all do ourselves a favor when we're out there talking about a service like this to look in our own communities. There's probably a high profile story or capital project that you're doing that could have either been prevented or somewhat mitigated through having the right resources and planning many years ago now. The longer we defer having those resources, the longer it'll take us to catch up with that deficit that we're essentially creating through our own policies and around land use and hydrology and climate change. So.
Thank you. We have Director Kuhn, Marsh, and Day, and I'm looking at the clock as well.
Yes, I'd like to get a little bit more clarification about that $60,000 item that is named grants and consultation or whatever. I was under the impression when that first came up that part of that was going to be seed money for receiving grants. Was I wrong with that, or?
See, one of the, may I?
Yes,
Madam
go
Chair,
ahead.
sorry.
Yes,
I
yes.
jumped in there.
Yep.
One of the challenges that we face, very similar to many other programs, is when we apply for federal funding or provincial funding, it's usually against a leverage of something. And so this service would give us that specific opportunity to leverage other grants. The challenge is that you have to put money aside in the reserve fund to be able to draw on that capacity. This program would have that.
Well, I could see doing that, but if you split it up then, if you split that 60,000 up and say, okay, well, we'll assist NGOs as well, there's not going to be much left for seed money. So I'm just wondering about that. I personally am not in favor of getting a whole bunch of non-government organizations involved, because in the end, what you end up with is more and more studies and more evaluations. And I mean, if we really want to make a difference, we better get going and do something rather than just have research and more consultation and more people involved that give us opinions. And what in the end effect are we getting for that? I've seen so many studies in my time, during my time that I was at the CVRD, beautiful studies, and you read them once and they end up in a drawer. And then in the end you wonder, okay, what actually happened? Have we actually done something that was mentioned in the study or not? And so I'm very leery about getting more and more studies done. There's a lot of money being spent, and I'm wondering, do we actually get much out of it?
If I may?
Yes.
One of the challenges that we face is that there is no public assent. We don't have a service that allows us to act on a lot of this information. We don't have the capacity to do it other than generally. And I think we've gone to the as far as we can. That's certainly the direction that we've been provided with, is that we need to go to the public with a very clear ask around water and watershed management, so that we can utilize that information effectively. What we are proposing and what we've put together is a draft budget. It is the prerogative of the board to look at our budget and say, no, we don't want or think it's a priority to expend money in these areas, and we'd rather see you would expend it over there. But that's the board's prerogative. Staff will be coming forward with their professional recommendations based on what the bylaw and what we have told the public are the objectives of the program. How we meet those objectives is something that's up for discussion, and something that's been discussed with the Cowichan Watershed Board, for example, around if they are providing a particular service, then it's a service under the function in contract to the CVRD around specific deliverables. That's one method. The other method is to provide them a grant for core funding, at which point it's a grant for core funding for an ENGO organization, not for the provision of our services.
Director Marsh, and then Director Day.
Thank
Close.
you. Ms. Miller, can you say a little bit more about the watershed protection and education programs, what that 250,000 would be? Could some of that go to, for instance, NGOs to do some of that work, or what are you imagining for that money?
You're looking at the last slide?
I'm looking at my notes, but I think
Okay.
it was from the last slide.
Okay, sure. We'll just go there. So just ignore the cost per 100,000 comment
Yeah.
on that particular one.
It's consulting and capital work, so
Yep.
I imagine that's some of what you would
It's
use
kind of,
for-
we've kind of rolled it up into major areas, and one of the things that we heard very clearly at the public level was they wanted more information about how best to manage their resources. They wanted more specific tools as opposed to broad generalities, and that would fall under the education program. The watershed protection program would be a lot around water quality work, and particularly in the south end and in some areas in the north where we've got major issues with groundwater, is understanding that resource more effectively.
So just to clarify, none of that money could go to local stewardship groups
It could be a contract for services
Okay.
under those specific
terms?
terms, right?
Thank you. That's what I
Yeah.
imagined, so
So
thanks for clarifying.
an example of that would be is we have had a contract in the past with an NGO to do education in the schools. Could that program be expanded around water conservation and water ethics in a more structured way to deliver the program effectively across the region?
Right. And in case you don't know, North Cowichan does have an environment student every year. We did it around lake health this year, but maybe next year the water thing, if you could contact them about.
Your staff have expressed an interest in collaboration around that particular program.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Director Day and then Director Acton.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Just a question and then a comment once I find out I'm not right off base here. Could I be comfortable making the statement that the health of our watersheds is declining? Would that be an accurate statement?
Yes.
Okay, so then the part that was missing in that presentation to me is a statement something like that. It might have been embedded in a couple words here and there, but it wasn't quite bold enough with that message and probably near the beginning, because I don't know if the average person, I mean, I know there's been a lot of press over the years, but perhaps a reminder might be in order at the outset if we're looking for support.
Thank you. So a stronger call to action.
Director Acton, then Director McGuire.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think this is a really important service, and I'm glad to see that a lot is going to staffing because of what you said about having the capacity, and Director's Kuhn comment about many studies being done, and I was just cleaning out my stack of CVRD stuff on my desk yesterday, and I did come across a whole bunch of studies have been done in 2010 and one as far as 2008. And then I asked, well, how did these, that question of how did these get integrated? And so I'm hopeful that if we have the capacity, we can start to communicate with the land use services and use those. And just because we haven't in the past, doesn't mean we should stop trying. So I guess, yeah, and I look forward to hearing more about how we're going to integrate that and also how we are going to work the watershed protection part. I still have some gaps there around the province and how they're going to support us.
Director McGuire? Okay, so we are moving on now. Thank you very much, Kate. And those will be online and on the agenda in
We'll be submitting the ambassador package to all the directors at the end of this week.
Thank you, Chris. Moving on now to R2.
R2, report and recommendations of the Sport Tourism Grant Subcommittee that was created by the Regional Services Committee, and their recommendation is that it be recommended to the board that the sport grant criteria dated June 27th, 2018 be approved, and that resolution number 143853A, and I'll just read what it said, the old resolution, that for any event receiving local government funding, 25% of event surplus funds up to the amount of the original investment be returned to the sport tourism function in an investment recovery reserve fund, with the remaining 75% designated as a community legacy, is no longer applicable due to anticipated difficulties in recovering the event surplus funds.
So has it been moved? Second? There's quite a few of us on that committee. And there's a question. Director Jackson?
Yes, thank you. I'm not clear, and I'm happy to go along with it. I'm sure you guys have it covered, but I just couldn't get my mind around number 2. So can you explain that to me? I had a whole bunch of scenarios go through my mind, but then I thought maybe you could just tell me what that means and why there would be a problem getting the money back.
Well, I sit on it as well, but maybe someone, they were having issues with that, so they made it clearer and decided not to do that. So you're not on that committee at Island Savings? It was just Director Lefebvre, Nicholson, myself, and Director Walker, or not Lefebvre, Director Walker.
So just to follow up, so let's say we give somebody $10,000 and they end up only spending 3,000, where does the other 7,000 go? Like, why would we not try and get it back? Or how am I thinking about this wrong?
Kathy, could you answer that as, we have Kathy Melmock here who's also sits on that. Welcome, Kathy.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll do my best to hopefully clarify anything in John Elzinga's absence. And Director Jackson, if I can get you to repeat what your question was, please.
I just couldn't make sense of if there was a sports tourism event and just pulling a number out of the hat, we gave them $10,000, and then something went wrong and they couldn't do it and they only spent 3,000. Why would we just let them walk away with the 7,000? Like, I am assuming that I'm getting this wrong somehow.
The intent of that particular clause was to ask for a successful event, one that was carried out and had a surplus, to return some of those funds to create a kitty, as it were, for future events. And that was the clause that was decided was not administratively possible, and it might actually provide a bit of a deterrent, if you will, to some of the smaller events. The question, to my recollection, was not described whether an event was not successful, did not get carried out, how the funds that were allocated would be returned. That wasn't what that was intended to cover.
Follow up, Director Jackson?
Just one more. So you give them $10,000, they have a successful event, they only spend 8, and they get to keep the 2?
No. One of the things that we did discuss was the allocation of funding, so how much the group gets up front and how much the group gets after their post-event report. And there was a holdback of 25%, so there is that. But again, if those on the committee that were there could recollect whether we had that discussion as to whether there was an unsuccessful event and the money was allocated, how we would recoup the funds allocated.
Director Nicholson.
You might be able to refresh my memory. We're talking about very small grants, are we
Correct,
not?
yes.
Only up to $3,000.
Correct.
And the issue of trying to administratively get money back is not, when it's a grant, is not, practical.
Director Lefebvre.
Thank you. I'm not at the committee meeting. I'm not part of that committee, but it seems to me that quite often organizations get a number of grants, and to determine who should be given money back would also seem problematic, especially at this low level of grant funding.
I'm going to call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you so much, Kathy.
Thank you.
Moving on now to R3.
A report from